Okay, so our first presentation, organizational change. And we have set ourselves some objectives. So of course, when we embark on something, there's something we want to achieve. So then objectives we've set for ourselves. We want to first of all describe general characteristics of organizations. Now, sometimes I let people in advance that we sometimes cover things because they're coming from different backgrounds. Sometimes people know of these things already. You might find it a bit boring that we are doing things or we are talking about things that you feel are elementary. But there are others too who maybe are seeing this for the first time. So we try to get everybody on the same page. So if you find it a bit something you already know and other things, that's fine. In fact, you can actually help or you can support with whatever ideas or experiences you have. And that's why I say I'm facilitating the course, but not really teaching per se. So we're going to look at what we call the general characteristics of organizations. And then we have what we call the forces of change. Forces of change or the causes of change, whichever we want to look at it. And then there are areas that we can change, or areas of organizational change. And then there's a general process of embarking on change. We always talk of, now the course here is, or the model is change management, how we are going to be managing the change. Sometimes change is inevitable. It comes whether you like it or not. So how do we manage that? Or even how do you build the capacity? We'll be talking about the various forces, but just to get people have it in mind that it's not something you voluntarily embark on. Sometimes change can be forced on you. You get to the office in the morning and your office is flooded, your computers are in water and all that. What do? You can't say, oh, you can't even do anything. We are going to be forced to change. So the question now is, how do you manage that? How do you get people to agree with what you want to do? And so when we're talking of change, it's not the things that we voluntarily do on a day-to-day basis, but sometimes change is actually imposed on you. And so we need to look at that as well. And then the last one is what we call resistance. There's always a resistance to change. Whatever you want to do, people want their comfort zones. If I come to work 8 hours, I do my routine things and I go back home and my salary comes and I'm comfortable, I don't see why I should be rocking the boat, as they always say. You will come and tell me that, oh, if we don't do ABC, in the next year or two, our sales will decline or our profits will decline and other things. People probably will not listen to you because they say we are doing well. So what's your problem? And so there's always that resistance, or you want to move people around and all that. So we have to explain, we have to look at some of these sources where the resistance is coming from and how we can always manage that resistance. So we are going to first of all look at what an organization is. So the word organization, what at all is it? Generally, there are several ways of looking at it. Mullins talks about a formal structure. So groups interacting within a formal structure created by management, and the whole idea is to carry out what we call goal-seeking activities. You want to achieve something. So people come together in a formal structure, working towards achieving that goal. And that's what an organization is, or that's what one describes an organization. Another description is a social arrangement for achieving controlled performance in pursuit of collective goals. Again, we are looking at achieving some specific or collective goals. A group of people brought together in a formal way for the purpose of achieving certain objectives. So when we look at these ways of looking at an organization, all we can see is that they have one thing in common. It's talking of people or human beings, interacting. So the people are the core, interacting in some kind of structured way, and then to achieve a certain goal. So if you gather people, maybe you have your friends or groups on maybe Friday night, you go to sit at a bar and you drink and chat and all those things. We can't call that an organization, because even though it's a group that you assemble maybe on a weekly basis, and there's something you are doing, maybe you're enjoying yourself, that's a goal, all right. But then we can't call it an organization because there's no formal structure. So you need a formal structure with all that goals in mind, so that everybody who is within the organization is working towards achieving that goal. And so everything that we talk about in organization has to do with people, and then structures, and then a goal or objectives you set to achieve. And all you do on a daily basis is to ensure that you achieve that objective you set for yourself. And you can only do that by working with some processes or some structures. And so it's clear that we have, like I said, people at the core interacting in a way, and then processes are meant to achieve goals. So those are the main key issues. So as we mentioned, an organization, of course, you cannot have an organization without people. And then you cannot have an organization that people just come in and do whatever they want and go away. We can't call that an organization, because there has to be a purpose. And again, it has to be structured and managed. So there have to be formal structures, reporting lines, and decision-making processes and all that. Then we'll call it an organization. Of course, we all know several types of organizations you can have. Even have criminal organizations. They are also structured in a way, because they have reporting lines and other things. Associations, societies, schools, not-for-profit, all these, we call them, or all these are characterized as organizations. And on a day-to-day basis, what happens in an organization? The organization has subsystems. So there's a formal subsystem. So what we, here is my notation, yeah. So there's a formal subsystem that we all know. So formal in the sense that, we know the organogram, who reports to who, HR, we have finance, we have this, we have that. We have the policies, we have our goals outlined, what we want to achieve at the end of the year, the vision. We have the tools that we all bring in, the technologies and other things to try to achieve what we've set for ourselves. If it's manufacturing, all the equipment and all that. So those are the formal systems. So you go into organization, you see all this. But there's also the informal. The informal are the things that are not written down, that are not in policies, but actually are running the organization. Relationships, the politics, the ethnic groups that are forming, the cliques, all those, informal or unrecognized groups. But they can be very powerful in organizations, especially those that are not really being, that don't have oversight by some other higher authorities. Maybe I just set up my company, and I'm the one in charge. So I employ my relatives. You see, so you can have an accountant, who is trying to do his professional work, but because maybe the CEO is your uncle, somebody lower in the ranks can wield some power in the organization. And those are the informal things. And sometimes they are really the things that actually run the organization. We'll come to talk of culture. Our culture now more or less straddles both, in the sense that we have the formal culture, what we see, maybe the time you report to work, the dress code, all those things, reporting lines, those are all part of the culture. But there's also the informal culture as well. I've just talked about, and the informal culture thing, if you're not careful, most of the times they are the things that actually even drive the organization. Gossiping, backbiting, grapevine, promoting people out of nowhere. So sometimes we're not following the lines. Before you realize somebody has been promoted, and and there's all this firefighting here and there. We'll come to talk about what we call cultural entropy. So all these are things that happen in the organization. But generally, we take inputs from the environment. So the inputs, from the environment can be anything. It can be materials. It can be on a daily basis. Any organization, of course, you take in inputs. Even for nothing at all, you buy electricity, you buy water, you buy stationery and all those things. So all those are inputs into your organization. And then they go through these processes, and then you have outputs. Mostly the output will be the goal that you've set for yourself, organizational goals that we've talked about. What do you want to actually achieve? That's your output. It doesn't matter what other organization it is, even if it is voluntary organization, you want to do something. Maybe you go and clean some gutter somewhere. Of course, that is an output because you have been able to achieve something. And especially if you get feedback, people praising you for doing a good job. Those are your outputs. So at the end of the day, there's always a kind of output. A school, of course, your outputs are the students that are graduating and the research you are doing and all that. And then even the employee engagement and employee satisfaction is also another critical thing about organizations. The more satisfied employees are, of course, we all know the better the organization, because there are some places where they do research on the best companies to work for. So people do research asking people, look at the country here. What companies or what organization would you like to work in? And people will mention some organizations. I'm sure if we do the poll here, people will mention, I want to work here. Because maybe they pay well, they treat their employees very well. They have a lot of benefits and all those other things. And so people want to work there. And so employee satisfaction should also be your goal, because if employees are frustrated and angry, of course, they can bring down the entire organization. And we'll come to talk of resistance to change as well. And then we also have the environmental factors that affect organizations. We always talk of pest analysis and all those things. The political atmosphere. A government can change and your organization will collapse or will be collapsed. Economic factors, all these inflation, exchange rates, and other things. Sociocultural culture is an issue. Especially if we take our context here, Ghana here. Fridays, people want to close early and go for funerals and all those things. All those things are all influencing the way you operate. Because I mean, if there's a funeral, you can't, because it's our culture. Most employees, you are more or less, you have to participate because somebody is bereaved and all those. So all those things influence the way you function in the organization. And of course, there's technology, the technologies that are coming out now, which are influencing everything. And the last one, of course, I already mentioned something about it, nature. Nature has a big influence on our operations and our functions. We just had floods, a day or two ago. Some offices were flooded, and so everything comes to a standstill. You can't do anything. But we're coming to talk of building capacity for change. How can you build the capacity of your organization in such a way that even when your server rooms and your computers are flooded, work can still go on? How will you do that? Because it happens. Like the US, where they had their 9/11 bombing, 3 days after that, some businesses who were in those buildings were back in business, and others collapsed because your whole office is gone. But for others, the office was gone, but work could still go on. They could still pay their employees and all that. And that's those who actually built some capacity in such a way that when something happens, you can still, and that's where visionary leadership comes in. What can you be putting in place so that when the jolt comes or when something happens, you can still be, or you can still survive And that's what change management is all about. And so all this, so when you are going to talk of change management, all these things have an influence on the organization on a day-to-day basis. What you do formally and the informal things, the inputs you take in, it's just like these days we've been talking of war here, and so supply chains are broken, and so supplies are not coming in. So if you were an industry that was relying on, it's just like we heard of fertilizer and other things, it doesn't come anymore. So what do? You just sit down and fold your hands. You have to do something because that's a change. And you need to find a way of managing that. And so when we talk of organizations, we have all these, they are organic things, dynamic. And so on a day-to-day basis, we have to see how we can keep them running and surviving. So the key to any organization's optimal performance, prosperity, and long-term survival is what we call the quality of fit between all the things that you are doing. So when we talk about quality of fit, you need to be able to perform optimally. The inputs coming in, or how do you optimize those ones so that they don't disrupt your activities? The formal and informal systems within the organizations, within the organization, and then keeping the external environment in mind, how they influence, and of course your outputs as well. And so to be functioning and be surviving, you have to keep this dynamism, in an optimal way to ensure that things are actually working. And mostly that's what change management is all about, because any small disruption in something has a potential to affect most other things in the organization. And so you need to be managing all these things as we go along. So we call it the quality of fit. So everything should be in alignment. It's not a state, it's not an event, but it's a process, more or less a day-to-day basis. So when we talk of change management, it's all about striving to continuously achieve this fit. So when we say striving we are doing things on a daily basis to ensure that, now, like I said, we'll be talking of cultural entropy eventually. There are some organizations that spend a lot of time and energy on things that are not actually contributing to achievement of your organizational goals. So you get to the office and maybe some employees are fighting and they end up in the police station and you have to go to court, and all those things are taking your time and energy. And so you are not actually achieving what you've set to achieve. And those are change management issues. So you need to be able to manage things in such a way that you continue to operate optimally. Because if you allow all these things to distract you, then at the end of the day, of course, you realize that you have not been able to achieve what you set to achieve for yourself. And it's not surprising that most organizations start very well, but they collapse eventually because there are so many things, going on. And if you cannot put your finger on all of this and ensure that, everything is operating optimally, then you are going to have issues. And so organizations are what we've just talked about, and then they are dynamic, and we have to keep them that way so that we can survive and then also achieve whatever we set to achieve. So this brings us to the issue of organizational change. So when we now talk of organizational change, I want to start with some quotations here. So when we talk of change, Charles Darwin, some of you who have done some biology or evolutionary biology, he says that it's not this, after studying all these plant and animal species over the years, he realized that it is not the strongest or the most intelligent that survives when changes come, or when there's a need for change. It is those who can accurately perceive changes in the environment. It's just like I mentioned, and successfully change and adapt to it. So when people were setting up offices and people perceived that, or people were able to think ahead and say that, no, what if something happens to this building? No, okay, so in that case, let's have a virtual office, or let's have another office somewhere, so that, because you are able to perceive, changes that are likely to happen. And then when it actually happens, then you don't have a problem because you have actually prepared for it. It doesn't matter how strong you are or how intelligent you are. If it hits you, you are going. If you didn't plan for it, you are going. That's what he's talking about. So what it simply means here is that for any organization to survive, you must be ready and you must be willing to change because it will come. So you should be ready for the change. And you should also, there are some people who are very resistant to change. Again, we'll talk more about that. No. So if you are not really willing to change, then you'll be swept off by a whole lot of other factors that we'll be looking at. So his quotation is saying that it's not your intelligence, it is not your strength and all those things, but you should just be able to perceive what is happening in the environment and then position yourself in such a way that you will survive when these things happen. Then there's another quotation from Machiavelli. Some of you who might have done some literature or other things, you would have come across Niccolo Machiavelli. He published a book called The Prince, which most politicians use. So when we talk about Machiavellianism, it's some strategies you do to keep staying in power. So all these leaders who stay in power for long, they practice Machiavellianism. They find a way of dividing people and suppressing your critics and all those things. And so, but he put this quote saying that there's nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. So what he's trying to say is that when you want to bring about change, initiating a new order of things, you are going to have issues because it's going to be difficult. And the difficulty comes from where? He says the reformer has enemies in all those who profit from the old order. So the status quo, some people are benefiting from it. And you want to change that. So they are going to resist. And then even those who will benefit from it, most of them are not really defending or they are not supporting you per se. They most likely are just unconcerned. And so there's always, so what the import of this also is that resistance is always stronger than acceptance. If you want to bring in changes, especially significant change, there's always going to be resistance. And that resistance is usually stronger than acceptance. And so we also need to bear that in mind, in the sense that, and it's not surprising, most of the times, change efforts in organizations fail because there's always resistance. You can achieve something up to a point, but resistance will come in. I always use an example of an organization that they realized that employees started coming to work late. And so they said, okay, how do we solve this? So let's introduce a clock-in system. So they just bought the devices and put on the gates. When you come at 8 o'clock, you clock in, and then 5 o'clock, you clock out. So they thought that by putting that, and then they told employees that, of course, if you don't clock in and out, of course, it will affect your salary or it will be deducted. It will be assumed that you didn't come to work. And so it will be deducted from your salary, or that day's wages will not be paid. Now, what happened? All the employees, or most of them were doing, was that they come and clock in, and then they go out. Some of them even go back home. And then when it's getting to 4 or 5, they come back and they clock out. So looking at the devices or the report that you get, they have been at work from 8 to 5. But in actual fact, nothing has happened and we'll come to see why, because change management involves a whole lot of strategies. You don't just put something up overnight. It takes a whole lot of management and leadership, strategies to be able to effect that. It works in some organizations, in fact, some organizations by 5 after 8, if you get there, you better go home because you can't even clock in to start with. But other organizations have tried and it has failed. And we'll be coming to see why we have situations like that. So what we're saying is that, what this George Bernard Shaw is saying is that, progress is impossible without change. And those who cannot change minds cannot change anything. If you're a manager or a leader, you can't change the mindset of the human beings. You can't change anything. It's like we're having in our country these days. We have a particular mindset when it comes to filth and rubbish. The mindset is that we just throw garbage out, wherever we are. You drink water and you just drop the thing. That's a mindset. How do we change that? Because if you can't change that, all the cleaning you are doing, the silting, and spending millions of cedis dredging gutters, and it's not going to change anything because the mindset of the people have not changed. And so if you cannot change minds, then you can't really change anything. And that's because change is all about the human beings. It's all about people. And then we cap this off by this popular change quote that you will see in all change management literature or change management books. The only constant in life is change. It's attributed to this Greek philosopher several years or centuries ago. So what you need to bear in mind, the only constant in life is change. There is always change going on. So what is it at all? So we've talked about organizational change. What at all is it? So when we talk of organizational change, we are saying a modification or transformation of your structure, your processes, or your products from one current state or from the current state where you are to a more desirable state or a future desirable state. So in that case, you are transforming things or permanently altering patterns of behavior. The way we behave in organizations, how do we permanently change that? Because like I just gave the example, behaviors are very difficult to change. And to be able to effect it, you should do things in such a way that you permanently, and there's always, maybe in the local, or not the local, the jargon, we say backsliding. You can always backslide. It's like people do New Year resolutions. Oh, this year, from January 1st, I'm not going to drink anymore. I mean, that's just, that's not how you bring about change. You can do, within 3rd or 4th January, you are back drinking anyway. Because you can't permanently alter behavior that way. It needs, and that's why some people who are alcoholics, they take them through more or less rehabilitation. Go through a long process to wean you out of the old behaviors and then to the new ones. So it's not surprising that changing behavior in organizations is very, very difficult. I mean, if you go in there and there's already a certain culture, you will adjust to it. But if the culture is already existing and you now want to change it, it's very, very difficult. Or it's difficult to permanently alter behavior. And so you can always change things. You can always change things, either your structure, your processes, your products, and all those things, or of course, the humans as well. How do you permanently alter their behavior? And why do we talk about change? Because you have to survive. Survival creates the need for change. You need to survive. If you don't change, or if you don't position yourself in such a way that you can change, chances are that you are not going to survive. And we've had examples of companies, both local and international, which have just faded out. There were one time, we had Ghana Airways, that was more or less a global kind of brand. And eventually it just went all the way down. And now it doesn't exist anymore because things were not being done the right way. So it didn't survive. We have several other organizations like that. So we'll be mentioning both local and external examples as we go along. So, and then I'll talk about the forces of change. So we say we want to alter our behaviors, our processes, and other things so that we can achieve a higher or a future more desirable state. Now, but what are the forces, or what is causing these things to change? You can have what we call the internal forces, originate from inside or from outside, external forces. Already mentioned some of them anyway. So So the internal ones, I can just go in and then we'll look at this. Now, several of them, maybe in businesses, you've realized that your profits are declining. So, or things are just no longer working. So we've been hearing of mergers, and acquisitions and all those things here and there, because you've realized that you've come to the end of the road. There's very little you can do now. And so you go into mergers, or somebody takes over the company. And that's a change issue. Because if you are merging two organizations, you are merging two cultures. And some people might lose their jobs, others, and all those things. How do you manage that? Because there are a whole lot of issues that you need. And then, of course, to close the performance gap, maybe how you are performing, you are no longer achieving that. So you need to bring in new things, new equipment, restructure jobs here and there, modify your strategies, and even when we have labor issues. Now, so all these are internal forces. Workers are going on strike, or there's overstaffing. Too many people are walking around doing nothing. It happens in, especially some of the public sector organizations. People are just employed because they want to give people jobs. Oh, my nephew has completed school and he's sitting at home doing nothing. Can you get him something to do? I say, okay, let him come. Then you issue an appointment letter, no job description, nothing. And then the person comes and is walking around. A new person comes and decides to fire all these people. And so all these are, or sometimes they can be understaffing, where people are stressed or people are overstretched in the way in their activities. You need to look at that as well. So new leadership. So you get a new CEO or new head. We always say new king, new law. He comes and he wants to restructure things. Sometimes there are conflicts. Some people are not talking to each other. People are having issues here and there. So you have to do some restructuring here and there. So within the organization itself, there are reasons why you should embark on change, or why you need to change, because you want to achieve certain things. I have an example of this guy who used to work in an organization. He says he's a computer person, so he doesn't care about his appearance. Of course, he was good, a good programmer. So he was working in this organization. Sometimes he would just get up and maybe the same shirt. You wear the same shirt the whole week. But he was so good that they didn't care about that, and because his output was really significant. But then a lady was employed in the department next door, and this boy had some kind of interest in the lady. So he started, of course, trying to kind of improve his brand somehow. So he started washing and ironing his clothes and wearing very decent, dresses, not dresses, trousers and shirts and so on, or tie and suit. Because so he has voluntarily changed because he wanted to achieve some objective. I don't know how it ended up, whether he succeeded or not, I have no idea, but at least he has decided to voluntarily change. Sometimes you might have change imposed on you, and those are the external ones. So internally, we can do a whole lot of things, but we can have external ones. I didn't talk of culture. We'll come to talk of culture briefly. The external ones are a whole lot. Market forces. Now we are in an era of globalization. You want to, you come up with something, and within a twinkle of an eye, you have got people imitating, people appropriating what you have done. We'll again discuss more about this, and so on. So, or people are doing better things than you. So what do? Or your consumers, their taste has changed, and so what do? Sometimes even customers can enforce change on you because they've decided that their taste has changed. They no longer want what you have. So you are forced to change. Legislation, laws can enforce you or can bring about some changes. tax structures, politics, customers, I already mentioned customers, new technologies coming out, and then of course, nature, we've talked about nature already. So all these are things that you have no option. All of a sudden you wake up, maybe for the year you do your budget, you say, oh, at the end of the year, I'll probably pay taxes this amount and this and so on and so on. Then along the way, a new tax regime is announced and you have to comply. So you have to come back and restructure things. Politics, we can't talk about politics. I mean, we all know the influence of politics on organizations. Customers, I talked of customers. In fact, customers can have, there's one, sometimes I just use a few examples here and there, not to just keep things as straightforward as we are. I'm getting some messages pop up, so they're disturbing me. Yeah, okay, so this example, there's a company, or not was, there's a company in the US called Gap. If I can just stop this, so sometimes we can Gap, it was it's a clothing store or shop, yeah. So this is their logo. So they have a logo for Gap. It's either this or the white, the blue on the white background. And then they decided to change the logo without the knowledge of the customers. So the customers, so management just sat down and decided that we want to change our logo. And so customers woke up one morning and then they saw that Gap had changed its logo. I think this is the one. Yeah. So they had changed. Where is it? A bit slow here. Yeah, okay. So they had changed the logo from how it appears to this. So this had what the management thought, was going to be their new logo. But customers protested. Customers said they wanted this, or they are used to this logo, because it's a clothing store. I mean, so when they go in, they buy the clothes, that logo is in there. And then all of a sudden, they changed to this. The customers protested. So October 6th, they changed to this logo. By October 12th, they were back to the old look, because customers protest. In fact, some customers were even burning their clothes. It was overnight, and they spent millions of dollars rebranding. They took down all these signs with the old logo and put the new logo there. And then customers rebelled and started burning their clothes. They started even attacking their shops. They had to close some shops and so on. And so within a week, they had to go back to the old look. So we realized that customers can be very, very powerful. They can impose. You are forced to respond, because you can't say that, as for me, I'm still going on with what I want to do, right? Because they won't buy your clothes. Then what do you do? So the external forces can, in fact, Coca-Cola also tried something, and the customers fought back. And so they also, they said they were changing their taste, and they also had to go back to the old taste and so on. So all these are just examples of the things that can more or less compel you to change. So what we're saying is that change can be initiated deliberately by managers or leaders. We'll talk about leaders and managers. I don't need to talk about that now. Or evolve slowly within the organization, or be imposed by specific changes, and then arise through external pressures. So especially nature, or including nature. The external pressures, we already mentioned a whole lot of them. So nature is the biggest one that can influence, or that can impose change on you. And so we have, so what we're saying is that organizations change either because they want to change, or they have to change, or both. So you can decide, oh, I want to change, fine, but sometimes you are compelled to change. So for every organization, the leader, your mandate is to prepare for change in the future whilst delivering results at present. And that is the challenge with, so you need to be ready for change when something happens, But at the same time, you should be delivering results at present. There were some companies who were focused more on delivering results, forgot about the future. The typical example we always use worldwide is Kodak, or even the one Blockbuster. There's a Blockbuster that time was when people were renting videos in shops. Those years where some of us who are older enough can remember that one. We had a video cassette player, and you couldn't, of course, there was no internet by then. So the video was in a kind of a library or a shop where you go, you pick out the video you want, take it home, go and play, and then you bring it back. And even when DVDs started coming out, they were still doing it. So they were opening shops all over, where the people were renting videos and so on. And when streaming, downloading started coming out, they were not paying attention to that because they were looking at delivering, they were making profits. They were delivering results at present. They didn't prepare for change, or they were not even looking beyond. So even when Netflix started streaming videos, they still, they didn't think it was going to have any impact. Until within a week or two, all customers just shut. Nobody was coming to rent a video anymore, because people have now got their computers and they were streaming movies over the internet. So who is going to go to the shop to rent a video? And that ended that, so the company collapsed totally. Within a period of 3 months, they went for a multi-billion-dollar company to bankruptcy or zero, because they were not looking into the future. We can also get examples of companies in Ghana like that. Maybe you can think along those lines, because one of our assessments, we always give students the opportunity to think of a company or an organization that is failing or has failed, and then try to find out what happened. And if you were put in the position as a change agent or the manager in that company at the time, what would you have done to try to see that the company survives? So these are sometimes some of the things we just discuss, so that we can share ideas on what we know about change management and all that. So we have all these forces of change, and so you as the leader, you need to be balanced, and that's why we talk of leadership and then management. I'm sure next week we'll talk more about that. So managers are ensuring that we are delivering results on a day-to-day basis. The leader is focused on the future. You have a vision where we are going. And so most organizations, the CEO is the one who is the leader. He is being strategic, trying to see where to position the organization. As for the day-to-day things, running around, he cannot be doing that. It's the management or the managers who are now involved in that. Of course, people play both roles, as most of the times to be an effective leader, you also need to be a good manager as well. So I will discuss more about that. Okay, one or two more. Where can we change? We just talked of areas, we talked of structure, processes, and so on. So we can change a whole lot of things within the organization. The structure, you can always reorganize the leadership, who reports to who. You can align departments or job roles and so on. You can also change your processes, how you go about it, how you go about things, especially some of these manufacturing. If you take, I mentioned Coca-Cola, if you take Coca-Cola, which started in 18 something, how they were producing Coca-Cola and how they are producing it today, there's a complete difference or a drastic change. The taste hasn't changed. Coca-Cola remains Coca-Cola. So sometimes there are certain things you can't change the product itself, because you have loyal, in fact, you won't even dare change things like Guinness, this beer and Coca-Cola and those things. We have Guinness, loyalists. You can't dare say that, okay, I'm trying to try a new type of Guinness. No, it wouldn't work. So you can't change the product. Or if it's milk, you can't do anything. But the processes, you can change those ones, or you can improve on those ones. You can change policies, strategies. Of course, technology, new things are coming out every day. So you can always change our or improve or upgrade our technologies and all that. And then, of course, the human beings as well. The culture is one. We'll have a whole lecture on culture. Culture is one of the things that is very, very difficult to change. Sometimes, as for the human beings, sometimes you can fire people and hire people, but but when it comes to culture, it can be a bit more dicey, and we'll be discussing that as well. So there are all these areas that and we can see that on a day-to-day basis, some things are happening that might involve you taking a decision to decide to make a change here and there. Like we talked about the human beings, people are fighting, or you say, okay, you move to this department. Somebody has gone to study, come back with a new qualification. No, you can't say go and continue doing what you are doing, because there's a reason why the person went to study. So you have to embark, you have to do so every day. There's something going on, and that is what change management is all about. So now we have types. So we'll be wrapping up. Once we've talked of types of organizational change, how do we go about it? We can have planned change versus the unplanned. I'm sure we've already covered some of these already. You can plan, sit down and decide, okay, from next week, this is our vision. We're going to do this and this and that. We're going to change this. That's fine. But there's also unplanned change. Just like I said, you get to your office and it's flooded. Now, you didn't plan for anything. You have to do something. And so there's that. There's continuous change, little by little. So you have what? Samsung Galaxy 1, Galaxy 2, Galaxy 3, incrementally. They are most of the times what they are doing is more of a customer-centric type of gimmicks, so that most of the time they don't really add that much. But the way they go about it, they make it look like, oh, no, Galaxy 2 is better than Galaxy 1. Normally, it's a bit true anyway, but there's no need for you to dump Galaxy 1 and take Galaxy 2, because if you look at it, most of the time, what do we use the phones for? 80 to 90% of people carrying the phones around use less than 10% of the functionality of the phone. But people spend 10,000 cedis to buy a glittering phone, Sometimes, well, to show off too is another thing, but you don't really use, and then the next one comes out, and then you dump the old one and you buy the new one. It's fine, but of course, that's why they want to do that, so that they continue making their profits and to survive and beat competition. And so you can be engaging in incremental change, and then there's what we call radical change. All of a sudden, you do a transformation. That has a higher potential of failing, because radical change is so this I'm just explaining what I already talked about. I won't spend too much time on this. The continuous change. So as time goes on, you are improving little by little as you go on. The radical change is what we call the punctuated equilibrium, or what you stay at a point for some time, and then all of a sudden this change line here is more like how the industry is going. Generally, people are improving or things are changing, but you stay for some time, and then all of a sudden you catch up, you make changes to catch up with whatever is happening in the industry, especially in this car manufacturing companies. When these Korean cars started coming out, they couldn't compete with the Toyotas and other things. But now they have, or they are competing, in the sense that they stay at a point, have their market, and they stay for some time, and then they take their time, do their research and all those things, and then they come out with a brand that matches what is already in the market. And so they are competing. So even though they might stay producing the same thing for some time, all of a sudden they come up with so we call this a punctuated type of equilibrium. But this involves a whole lot of strategies. Like I said, radical change has a potential of failing if you are not careful. Like I just mentioned, the gap situation. That was a radical change. Oh, let's change our logo. No, we have used this thing for a long time. Let's change it. So you just get a boom. You change from one thing to the other. If you're not careful, it will backfire badly. And it has happened for most organizations, especially once in a while we hear cars are being recalled, or they try to do certain things to match industry standards, only to realize that they didn't do it well, and so they have to bring it back. And that's a whole lot of cost to organizations. So it's always up to you. There are some organizations you can't change much. There's very little you can do. If you come to institutions, maybe academic universities, for example, especially in our part of the world, universities are resisting a whole lot of changes. We are still just trying to teach things the way we're being taught and the way things were taught. We still have classrooms with rows of desks, people sitting in rows, and the teacher is in front, who is the one who knows everything. And it's that era is dying out. I mean, because these days the knowledge or the content is all out there. What I'm teaching here is not something you can't get. If you go online, you can actually even assemble more knowledge even better than this if you want to. So content in itself is no longer the issue. It's just how you put things together and then facilitate the learning process. So learning should be moving from just delivering content to actually engaging in more collaborative activities, sharing ideas, experiences, and so on, so that everybody learns and then we improve. But if we're still going to be, history, go and learn history and come and write exam, go and learn geography, all those things. But if you take geography, for example, you even ask yourself, do we need to learn geography anymore? Because Google Maps, is doing everything. What do you want to do? What do you want? If I ask you, or even general knowledge, actually, we used to memorize certain things, so that we can go to write the exam and write them. But now you don't need to, because you are carrying a device. If I ask you any question, within a matter of seconds, you can get the answer. And so in most cases, that's why education institutions, very little is changing, but a whole lot are also changing in a way, maybe incrementally. And if we're not careful, sometimes, I've been saying this, these brick and mortar universities are likely to be suffering, because if you still think that students will come into hostels and come and sit in class and learn, and it's still working, because people want to, at least build relationships and all those other things. But a whole lot of things are going online now, or on the internet, and people are learning and getting degrees over the internet without going to the physical school. And so if you still are trying to be building hostels and other things, you're not careful, they'll stand there and nobody will patronize them. Anyway, so this is just, so what we're saying is that some organizations are much better at anticipating the need for change than others. So they are proactive, they search out potential threats and opportunities. In fact, there are some organizations, they employ people specifically to do these simulations and modeling and analysis and make predictions, especially these finance, fintech organizations. Where are we going? We should be able to make projections the next year, the next 2 years, and so on, so that we can position ourselves for that. They prepare for the stabilizing events that might occur, or anticipate changes they could initiate to gain competitive advantage. So some organizations have a higher capacity for change than others. Others are more reactive. We wait for something to happen, or somebody to come up with something, and then we copy, or we just leave things to God. I would say, we hope nothing happens, and so we continue like that, or God forbid that something will happen. While others are looking into the future and making, predictions and other things, others are sitting down waiting on God. And for those ones, when something happens, or the day God does not forbid, then you are in trouble. So the whole idea of change management is, we should be looking at how we can, in our small ways, make things in such a way that you position your organization in such a way that at least when certain things are happening, you can still respond, or you can still, now most of the times these don't apply to the public sector, because the public sector government is paying salary. So whatever it is, your money will come anyway. So sometimes people are not even thinking, because you do the routine. You just go, files come, you sign, or you process, push it further, and then that is it. So innovation, we'll come to talk about innovation and creativity and all those things. Those things, organizations should try to foster those kind of things, so that people become innovative and be very creative. In that way, you can always find solutions and move things forward. There are some typologies here, typology in the sense that you can always put things any way you want and give them names. So we have what we call a quadrant here, or we'll call it a typology of organizational change. Here we have, I just mentioned the proactive and the reactive ones. So you can either be proactive or reactive. So you wait for things to happen before you react and try to adapt. And you can also be incremental, little by little, or the radical, the transformational. So wherever you find yourself, you can always give a name or assign something to it. So if you are proactive and you are incremental, then we say you are tuning, or you are in the tuning era. That's the era, maybe quadrant. Then people are in the adaptation. You are only waiting for something to happen, and then you try to increment or change things a bit to try to see whether you can cope up. So you are always adapting to the changes. But what we want is those who are reorientation. Reorientation in the sense that you are transformational. You are more or less leading the market, and you can decide that you want to do this, and then people eventually copy you or they follow you, because you are a transformational leader and you are proactive. You can also be reactive and transformational, but in most cases, whatever you are doing, you are still reacting to what people have already, or what the situation or the environment has already created, in which case it's not the best, but at least those are more likely to survive than, so those organizations in this category are the ones that fail the most, because what's happening is that if you are only waiting for things to happen before you react, most of the time you will be overtaken by events. But of course, it also depends on the area or the industry. In some places, you have where the competition is not, it's very minimal. We'll come to talk about those ones as well. There are some places where there's no competition. Things like a diamond mine, for example. See, you are mining diamond, even though there's fake diamond these days, but you don't really have a competitor, per se, because you can't easily produce diamond. So we have things like that, but there are other, in most cases, or most other contemporary organizations, you will find that there is competition. So we can always assign names this way. So the last thing, or the last but one, we'll talk of resistance. Okay, I have done almost 1 hour. So yeah, so the process. So we'll be looking at what we call change management models. People have come up with a whole lot of strategies and ideas of how to effect change in your organization. One of them is Ketlewin. He has one of the models that we'll be looking at. But he puts things this way. He says that things are always held in a balance between two opposing forces. Those that are trying to promote the change and those that are trying to restrain or maintain the status quo. So there are always two forces, so it's in a balance. So you see that sometimes some places you introduce technology, and then before you realize, it goes back, because people are benefiting from what is happening. You are in your office, you are signing papers, people come and see you, and you never know. Maybe by the time they are leaving, they leave something on your desk. And so now you come saying that, okay, we are going to automate these processes. Nobody should come to the office anymore. Sit at your home and fill your form, submit, and then it will be processed. Now you can see what will happen. The persons who are benefiting from the status quo are going to resist or oppose. They will start finding ways of trying to say that this thing you are bringing, oh, it's going to, it's not going to help us that much and all those things. And they can even come together, form groups, try to resist. We'll look at that as well. And then, so at the end, you are in a kind of a balance. So we'll call it equilibrium. Equilibrium means you try to move forward, and then the other forces are pushing you backwards. So you are held in an equilibrium. So there are driving forces and there are restraining forces. It can even happen in an individual. Yeah, like you, as an individual, my car is old. I want to change it. There are driving forces. So I need a more comfortable vehicle. I need, to be able to have my peace of mind without worrying about, repairs and those things. So those are driving forces. But there's also a restraining force that is keeping me using that car. And mostly it is the finance or the money. You don't have the money, so that is a big force. So you are kept in an equilibrium, using the old car you don't want, but you cannot buy a new car. So that's the equilibrium you find yourself in. The same thing in most organizations. So you are held in that kind of balance because you want to move, but other things are preventing you. And so in this situation, what do you do? So Lewin has what we call a force field analysis. You can always analyze the driving forces, the restraining forces, and then see how you can do things. So you can achieve change by either strengthening the driving forces or weakening the restraining forces, or doing both. So what he's saying is that, of course, like I said, I'm using an old car. It's equilibrium I'm in. There are driving forces because I need, at least to be comfortable, to be able to move faster and all those things. But there are restraining forces, which is the money that is not there. So you can weaken the restraining force by ensuring that the money doesn't become an issue, or you minimize its impact. Maybe I go and take a loan. Once I take a loan, of course, I've minimized that force. Then the driving forces can overcome the restraining forces, and then you can move. So I can easily buy the new car by simply weakening the restraining force. The same thing happens in organizations. You can look at the various things that are pushing you and the things that are keeping you or restraining you, and then look at what you can do to remove the restraining forces or kind of enhance the driving forces. And so you realize that from the equilibrium you are, that's your current condition. This is where you want to go. That is up. So you go through, but you are in this equilibrium here. So you increase the driving forces. You see that this is larger now. And then you have also minimized the restraining forces. And then you are able to push things up to a level. So I push things up. So now I'm now at a higher level. Maybe I was using the cars, the old ones they call maybe I needed a Mercedes Benz. Okay. So from my Toyota, now I'll be able to move to Mercedes Benz. And now I'm at that equilibrium again. Now maybe I want a Ferrari, or what are the expensive cars? Yes. So I want a Ferrari now, but if I'm in a balance here, I can't even, there's no way I can go and get a loan that can let me buy a Ferrari. So the restraining force and the driving force, they are in a balance and you remain there. And so the buying the car is a simple illustration, but for organizations, the challenge is that if you are not careful, what's happening is that you will move up to a point and the restraining forces can mobilize themselves and push you all the way down, back. Just like I said, you install a clock in because there's a driving force. You want people to come to work early and be more productive and other things. That's a driving force. But you implement the change and you don't achieve it. Or it will work for maybe a week or two. So the or maybe after a month or something. But then people start seeing that, oh, this is not, so they start, resisting or mobilizing. And before you realize, what happened was that the things are now hanging there and nobody is even clocking in anymore. You've gone back to square one, as they always say. So change, and that's why we're saying if you embark on change and you don't anchor the changes, that you don't make sure that the change sticks or is permanent, what happens is that you are going to lose momentum, and then everything goes back. Like we said, people always want to be in their comfortable zones or their comfort zones. If you disturb it, then make sure that it's permanently disturbed, so that at the end, their comfort zone becomes the new status quo. Else, you are going to backslide, as they always say. So this is just one, and he has what to call the freeze, the unfreeze and freeze and so on, which we'll be looking at eventually. So we call this the force field analysis. The last thing is what we call resistance, which I've already mentioned. So there's always resistance to change. Like Machiavelli said, when you are trying to initiate a new order of things, those who are against are always more, not necessarily more, but because those who support or those who benefit from it don't really come out to support you, or they don't defend you. It is those who are against who are always more vocal, and so they end up more or less making sure that the things do not succeed, even though in the end it might have benefited a lot more people. Like this clock in that we're talking about. I mean, if everybody was really coming to 8, to work at 8 and actually producing, working fully and optimally, it's possible that at the end of the year, you get, what do they call it? The banks call it what? Is it, what? What they give us as allowance for performance. No, you perform very well, they give you bonus. Yeah, I think bonuses. So it's possible everyone would have benefited from a lot more bonuses, in the end. That because people resisted, you went back to square one and everybody started coming to work again, whatever they wanted. And then, so there's always this, there's this graphic that illustrates, we always want change. People want change, but they don't want to change themselves. So if you say, oh, employees should come to work at 8, oh, everybody will agree. It's a good idea. Let's all do that. But you probably will have an excuse. So as for me, where I stay or the traffic, I can't make it, and all that. So everybody wants change, but nobody wants to change. And so where is this resistance always coming from? We have the individual who is resisting. So individuals can resist change. Just like I said, a particular person's office is always, you are receiving, documents, and of course, Ghana here is obvious, or it's common. I have examples of somebody who started teaching before somebody was born. She went to training college and was teaching before this other person was born. Now this person went to secondary school, and just after SSS got a job in one of these public, I won't call but because it involves files and other things, And within 3 years, this person had bought a car and was building a house, whilst the teacher was still walking around. All those years, the person who started teaching before somebody was born, the same public sector. Somebody has come in, just gone to school, basic, but because the kind of work the person is doing, it involves hiding files and looking, and people coming to pay you tips so that you can look for their file and other things. That person, now you come to tell that person that from tomorrow we are going to automate all these things. Nobody is going to come to you for a file and so on. That person is going to resist. So as an individual, there's always resistance. And then there are groups in organizations too that can resist. Maybe you have 3 or 4 people working in a particular department, and normally lunchtime you go and have your lunch, chat a bit, And they come and say, okay, we're doing some restructuring. We're going to transfer somebody, to another place, either out of town or whatever. You see that your group, the cohesion of your group is going to be disturbed. So you try to find ways to see whether you can stifle that, or what can we do so that they don't. So groups have their interests, and then they try to protect that. So they can be a source of resistance. And the organization itself as a whole can resist change, just like the Blockbuster I mentioned. That whole organization was resisting the change because they said they were making money, or they had already spent money renting buildings, renovating buildings to make shops and other things. So it was very difficult for them to close all that and then try to see whether they can do streaming and all those things. So you can have individual resistance because of maybe economic factors, either it will affect people's pay or whatever, your habits. I just mentioned whether you go to lunch together with other people and so on. Insecurity, psychological factors. So many things can be the sources of an individual resisting change, or sometimes just ignorance. Sometimes people just don't know what is in there, and so they just resist. So we can have individuals resisting, and there's what we call a spectrum of behavior towards change. We can always go from deliberate sabotage, so you can wait for them to install the machines and do whatever. And because you don't like it, you can go in and sabotage the whole thing. And it happened with one of the cases we'll be looking at. It's called one of the popular cases, called the Foxmeyer drug story. That's a pharmaceutical company, a $5 billion company that contracted. They wanted to implement what we call an ERP, automate their processes, ordering, warehousing, transportation. So they had a software that they installed to help them to do all this. Now, but when they installed the software, rather productivity and everything started going down. And within a month or two, the whole organization collapsed. So they took the software company to court. They said they are the ones who collapsed their business. But in court, they were told that an organizational, software has nothing to do with the technical things. The thing was working. It was more of a management issue. So it was management's failure and not the failure of the software. And part of the management failure was because employees were deliberately sabotaging the things. So you come and install the machines and they will remove a part, and then it works for some time and it stops. So what they would have been doing manually and processing things, now the machine has stopped, go and bring a repairer. They waste the whole day and they come fix it, then they sabotage it again. So they can go from deliberate sabotage, through intentionally committing errors, withdrawing, slowing down, doing as little as possible. So this is a whole of protesting, learning, regressive, and so on. Doing only what is ordered, that is not going beyond what is required of you. Apathy, indifference, passive resignation. At this point, you now say, oh, okay, well, the thing has come to stay, so let's go with it. Or you can now have acceptance and all the way to the top, the enthusiasm where people are now excited, enthusiastic about it, and so on. So there's a whole spectrum. So individuals can be placed along this entire spectrum, whether there are people who are actively resisting, passively resisting, or they are indifferent, or they are. So if you have a bulk mass or a critical mass of your employees, in this resistance category, then you are going to fail, or your change effort is going to fail. As a change manager or change leader, you need to do things that will move people up to the acceptance level, and the people are excited and enthusiastic about it and so on. Then you will succeed. If not, so if you don't put strategies in place that will ensure that you achieve this, then you probably make progress a bit and then it will go back to zero. So managing change can be a very, very difficult process. And it's not surprising that most entities or organizations just remain as they are. They don't really grow. For the very progressive ones, if you look at the tech companies like this, the way they do things, because of course, they are the progressive organizations. They are growing from strength to strength. We'll talk about Amazon, we talk of Google and all those things. But others are failing. And that all has to do with how you are managing change issues, especially when it comes to employees. Groups can also resist. So like I said, people are in a group, they have certain things they do within the organization as a group, and you want to disturb that, they might resist. Group cohesiveness, the way they think, the way they behave, other things, they want to maintain that in the organization. So you try to, that's what, people don't like transfers and other things because they feel like it's going to disturb something or some status quo. So groups can equally resist. And then we have, again, another quadrant here where we have, I don't even need to spend too much time on this because there are some people who resist. There's the unconscious and then the conscious. Unconscious means they don't really understand the things. They don't know what is happening, but probably maybe they have been brainwashed or whatever. They are just resisting your change efforts. And you can do overt resistance or the covert resistance. Overt in the sense that you openly resist. That one is fine. But most managers or leaders would like people who will openly just resist. But the covert ones, those who quietly will say nothing, or worst of all, agree with you, and then go back and do a different thing, secretly sabotaging things. They are the ones who can be very dangerous. As for people who openly talk and then they vent out their anger and other things, they are fine. Managers can encourage people like that, but those who will not say anything, but will go behind the scenes and try to sabotage things, they are the ones who are, and that's why when we say you are conscious about what is happening, so you know exactly all the issues, but you are resisting in a covert way, then you are really a saboteur. You're actually sabotaging everything. Those who do it in an overt way, they are protesting, or we'll call them protesters, because they know the issues and they are out there agitating against it. So you know that they are protesting. You can deal with those ones. But as for the saboteurs, those ones, they are the ones who most likely, or who most of the times cause failures in organizations. The zombie doesn't even know what is happening. And so sometimes he comes to talk and you just see that, what he's saying, he doesn't really even know what's happening. So you can just ignore that person. He doesn't, and there are some people who are merely there to survive. So he's more or less protesting or resisting because he's looking at his survivor. He's or her survivor in the organization. So he doesn't really know exactly what is happening, but he's quietly or secretly trying to do things so that he can at least survive in the organization. So we can also categorize resistors like this. As somebody who wants to drive change, you can always try to see. It's very difficult to get who the saboteurs are or the ones who are the covert resistors. And most of the time, they are the ones who collapse organizations. The resistance doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, even pilfering, stealing paper and all, they are all forms of resistance. Because if you take paper home, and then we cannot get paper to do things that we would want to do, maybe hold meetings, print things, and so on. It's all part of it. And you are doing it in a quiet and secret way, or siphoning fuel like some drivers do, and all that, all those things are part of, or can be categorized as, covert resistance and other things. Anyway, so this is just looking at what we call, but there's something we call the, okay, I've already mentioned the organization resistance. The entire organization is resistant because it's likely to affect certain things, their brand and all those things. I don't need to belabor this one so much. But there's something called the 20, 30, 50 rule, a kind of generic rule that applies broadly. What we're saying here is that most of the times when you want to initiate things, at least about 20% of the people in the organization tend to support you or they welcome it. Now, 50% don't really care because once they are getting their salaries at the end of the month, they don't really bring it. Okay, we'll do it. If you don't bring it, that's fine. We don't really care that much. But there are others, the 30%, who are always resistant or who will kick against it. It's the same thing with even as you as an individual. An individual, no matter what you do, there are some people who don't like you. There's nothing you can do. It's just natural. You can't get 100% acceptance in everything. There are always people, a lot of the people don't really care. If people don't see you for a week or two, probably they won't even ask of you and so on. There are those who care about you or who support you. But the critical ones are the resistors. Now, it's not just cast in stone. For organizations, these percentages can change. But on a whole, this is how the research has sort of shown that generally we have things in these ratios, that there are always people who will support and there are always people who will be against. But the bulk of them are normally ambivalent. They don't really care. So you, the person trying to drive the change, your duty now is to see how you can move the people from the resistance and the indifferent zone to acceptance. So that's what, because the change is all about the human beings. So you have to find ways of ensuring that you get employees to accept whatever is. If we don't get at least 80% of people, because they are the ones who implement things. Management, you can only come up with your policy directions and other things. But on the ground, it is the day-to-day employees on the ground who actually do the work. And so if they don't buy into your vision or agree with what you are doing, you cannot get things to work. Just like I talked about the clock-in mechanism. There are some places, of course, you go there and people are working enthusiastically. At 8 o'clock, everybody is in there. But there are other places, 10 o'clock, before they start working in. And so how do you get them to move into that kind of zone where they agree that we should all come to work at this time? It's not just a matter of implementing a clock-in system, but a strategic leader can go about this in such a way that you eventually get all the employees to agree or buy into it. And you don't need to have a clock-in system to enforce it. It all depends on how you go about it. So most of the times you should try to bring in the fence sitters, but you shouldn't ignore the resistors. Sometimes the resistors, you can maybe weaken the resistance by removing some people, of course. And some people have been fired from organizations for either trying to lead resistance against some changes. But sometimes the resistance, we are looking at not just the destructive, but there can be constructive resistance as well. People can see that maybe whatever is being done is not going to benefit the organization in the long run, and they can resist. And that one, normally the resistors are much, much more. Maybe you can even talk of 70, 80%. A typical example I usually give was this person who was sent to, this is a real example, the Wa Technical University. By then it was a polytechnic, yes. I think there were serious management issues. So they appointed this person as a principal. He got there, and the first thing he did was to take 500,000 cedis and bought himself a brand new Benz car. So of course, instantly the employees realized that this man is not here for the welfare of this organization. and so they resisted. In fact, they blocked. You couldn't even drive the car on the campus. They ended up seizing it. That's also another form of resistance, but that's a constructive one. That one, normally, the resistors are plenty. I mean, a lot more people resist. But we're talking of the one that you want to implement positive changes, if I'll put it that way, and because they have some interest that they think is going to affect in a way, then they begin to resist or to sabotage things here and there. And they are the ones we are looking at, how you can manage those ones, how you can get them to buy into your, but you should never presume that everybody will have to agree with you before you can proceed. When we start talking about the change management models, we'll start seeing so change can only happen if the bulk or majority of people agree that, of course, let's go ahead, or it's worth the process. Sometimes some organizations lay off some staff, but the way they go about it, even those who are even laid off even accept, or they agree that for the betterment of everything, it's better I go home. And it's the way the management goes about it. Because sometimes when things get better, they are the first ones who are called back. And so even though downsizing or whatever it is might affect jobs, sometimes you can do it in such a way that people don't oppose or don't resist. They can agree that, oh, as for this, I think I have to go for the sake of the organization. So it's all management and all how you go about it. Okay, I've been talking for long, so let's just recap what we talked about. So we started by looking at what an organization is and what organizational change is all about. And we said it involves modifying or transforming structures, processes, and so on. And there are internal and external forces that influence change. And the change can be planned, that is based on the internal forces, or can be unplanned. That is when external forces compel you to respond or to change. It can be incremental, step by step, or it can be radical. There are other things we call developmental, but they are more like the incremental as well, transitional, and so on. And so there are several ways you can look at change, how you go about it on a day-to-day basis. But as time goes on, organizations, you can also change in a negative way, in a way, in which case you are actually not really responding to whatever is happening, but you have allowed the environment and the systems to more or less dictate everything. You are not able to respond. Like I went into some offices, and then the carpets, I'm sure the carpet has been there for 30 or 40 years. It's torn, so I keep asking, so how much will it take to take this thing out? Because it rains, people step water into it, and the place is so change. So you look at the office from the day it was opened, brand new furniture and everything, carpet and so on. 20 years down the line, you go to the office and realize that it has rather depreciated. So in this case, change has happened, but that has been imposed on you. You have not responded in any way to whatever is happening. Some offices, you go in, and of course, the ambience alone tells you that this is a progressive organization. Even some places, painting, just a common wall to paint the wall is an issue. And so these are all things that people should look at. Sometimes we think it's money, but it's not just money. No, it's all about leadership and management. And we talked about things being held in the balance by the driving forces and the restraining forces. And so how do you bring about the change? You either strengthen your driving forces, or you weaken the restraining forces, or you can do both, at the same time or simultaneously. And they were saying that resistance is always greater than the drive towards change. Resistance can come from individuals or groups or even the entire organization. And you can succeed, or you can get change to work if at least 80%. We saw the spectrum. Now, if majority of them are up at the acceptance level, then of course, change can take place, especially the radical change that we're talking about. So that's just a recap of what we've covered this morning. I've been talking for so long. I was expecting maybe some people might have questions, but if you don't raise your hand, I just keep going. But next, we are going to be looking at what we call change management now. So far, we have not talked about change management. We've only talked about organizations and then the change. But how do we build organizations' capacity for change? How do we plan and implement change, manage the resistance, and then ensure that the changes we have implemented actually stick or they stay? We call it anchoring the change so that you don't backslide. Like I said, people, right from a new year resolution. Companies do that, or some organizations also do that. Henceforth, management, we've met, we are going to do this, or we are going to implement, we're going to ensure that this happens. Well, then 1, 2, 3 days, you might put your, try to put things to work, but before you realize everything slackens, and you go back to zero. So, and take some water. So the anchor and the change is another, management strategy that you need to bear in mind. So moving forward, we are going to be discussing what we call the change management models, the kind of things people have put across, and managers, or as managers, we look at all these ones. Some of them can be applicable in our context, others are not, but at least we need to have a broad view of all of them. And then those that might work for us, we can always use them. Those that don't work, of course. So we call them change management models or methodologies. There are a whole lot. So what we normally do is, so from, this okay. I have an assignment here. It's not really an assignment per se, but just I'll come back and talk about the discussion, the introduction. So you can see that there are a whole lot of models that we have here. Outcome model, accelerating this, Beckett and Harris. So next week, once you form your groups, we will normally just do group 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. We can't cover all this in class. It's not possible. In fact, there are even more than this. So what we normally do is that our first group work, we share this among ourselves so that you go and read about it, make a 4, 5 slide presentation, and then we'll allocate some time that each group will make the presentation, so that invariably we'll cover all of them, in the sense that we can't take, if we're going to discuss these models one after the other in class, we will spend the whole year and we will not even finish. Yeah, Bismarck's hand is up. Yeah.
Good morning.
Yes. We're in afternoon now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
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 With the issue about change, I wanted to find out if motivations and incentives can drive such change. For instance, we were talking about clocking system in most workplaces.
Yeah.
So as a manager or a leader, if you find out that maybe you have the system in place, but people are not really patronizing it, can you use like a rewarding system or package, so that maybe, for instance, you can say that any employee that comes to work at exactly 8 at the end of the month, maybe for a continuous 1 month, will be given maybe a 5% increase in salary.
Yeah.
Of
course. We'll talk about what we call short-term wins. Short-term wins is one of the change management models we'll discuss in class here. We call it Kotter's 8-step model. Short-term wins, in the sense that you set yourself to achieve something, but if you take a first successful step, you can celebrate that. So we call it short-term wins. So like you can do that. You can motivate people, you can reward them. It's a way of keeping the momentum going. It's just like when you are playing football and you score the first goal or you score a goal. I mean, you celebrate. You can score in the first or the third minute. The football match is 90 minutes, you know. But when you score your goal, you celebrate. Even though at the end of the day, you are not sure whether you win the match, but you still, so managers do that, you know. So in change management, we also talk of, yeah. So when you achieve something, especially when some employees, just like you are giving the example here. In fact, we got it to work in some organization by adopting strategies like that, you know, where we say that, okay, keep the records. A department that is able to score at least 80% of their staff coming to work at 8, we are going to celebrate it and reward them at the end of the month. You know, and we do that. Once you do that, then others begin to also, you know, pick up. You know, so, and then it even became a competition. Who will get 100%? So eventually, at the end of the day, we actually achieved the whole change process without necessarily trying to force it or trying to compel people to have. So you just use this, like I said, keep the momentum going. Some small rewards here, recognition here and there, you know, mention people's names, send out emails congratulating people, and all those things managers do just to keep the momentum and motivation going on. And eventually you succeed. You know, the challenge we have most of the times is when leaders are aloof, or they more or less sit at in their offices, so cut off from what is really happening, and then you expect things to work. It doesn't work that way. If you really want to be somebody who wants to achieve results, you have to be there on the ground. Prepare to also get your hands dirty small. You know, you can't just remain at the top and get things to work. And so, yeah, it happens. And if you actually implement some of these things, it will work. Because they are human beings are always human beings. You know, if you motivate them, they will respond. If they are happy, that's why we have what we call the best companies to work for. Now, if you go to Google, for example, Google, they even say they are not a conventional organization. Employees are so, you can't even wait to go to work. The workplace or the work environment is so pleasant, it's so enjoyable. You know, you go in there and they have, you know, a gymnasium where you can go on break and go to the gym. They have restaurants, they have even daycare where nurses and mothers can bring their babies and they are professionally taken care of. So everybody you have the peace of mind to put in your best. And you see that, so organizations like that, they are very progressive because people are, and you are giving all the encouragement. Even when you fail, you are not reprimanded. You are asked to innovate. You can waste resources, but once you are failing and showing progress, you know, they are even being rewarded. And at the end of the day, every employee gets motivated and they are very progressive. You know, they keep coming out with new things all the time. So we want organizations like that. You know, at the end of the day, we don't want these hierarchies and structures where, you know, the MD is, or whoever is up there, and before you can see the person, you have to complete forms and you know, all those things. If we have a way of reducing that, you know, so that, and most of these startups, you know, people, especially these young entrepreneurs who are really succeeding, you know, they adopt these approaches where you engage the employees. In fact, go to their restaurant or go to their cafeteria, eat with them, you know, chat with them. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't reduce your salary. It doesn't do anything. But the more you relate, that way you even get to know there's this grapevine culture that we have in Ghana, where the gossip, you know, things that information that gets thrown around, but it's not coming from management. You know, or we hear that they are going to do this. We hear they're going to do this and all that. And sometimes all that information, especially if eventually some of them turn out to be true, then we build a grapevine culture, you know, where people at a point probably will not even believe communication from management, but they will believe what they hear from the grapevine. or the gossip. And when it gets to that point, your organization is pretty much messed up because you can't get things to work. We'll talk of cultural entropy towards the end of this module. So we'll cover a bit more on that. But yes, motivation is part of it. And like I said, we'll discuss that as well. Most of the time, it's not just money. Money doesn't really motivate. Money demotivates, but money does not motivate. In the sense that if I double your salary, your chances are that you are not going to change the way you work. You can't say that, oh, now my salary is double. So if I were coming to work at maybe 8:30, now I'll come at 8, and then I'll apply myself, and you continue doing your routine things. The salary is doubled. But if I reduce your salary by half, that's where you will see the true colors of the people. So money demotivates a whole lot, but it doesn't motivate. So if you want to motivate employees, it's not just money. It's some other things that you should look at. And so, but at least we'll be discussing those ones. So yes, so I'm ending here by saying that next week we'll share this among ourselves. I'll put a link here. If you have the slides, you can click on it. It will open the website or you can even Google, change management models. You see a whole lot, like I said. And so we'll share this, and then each group, depending on how many groups we have, I think, okay, I've taken our quarter here, yes. But we'll discuss quarter's change model. That's one of the standards that is discussed in most or almost all business schools at the master's level. And then, but each group will take one, do your small research, make a presentation, and then, so at the end of the day, at least we will cover some of them. Not necessarily all, we can't cover all, but at least once you've done taking a change management course or module, when people mention the ATCA model, at least you should have an idea. The Kate Lewin that I talked about, Beckett and Harris, change leaders roadmap. All these are models or ideas people have put together. So sometimes it's good to look at them, see what they are recommending, and then you can always adopt some of them if you want. We're not saying that there are things you must apply. At the end of the day, everything has to be contextualized. It's always whatever is happening within your organization, and how you will manage it. There are general things we can always look at, but behaviors of human beings change radically depending on the environment. I always use examples of, the university here and the mall, Accra Mall, the washrooms. You go to the washrooms at the mall and it's always clean. Even though thousands of people use the place is always clean. At least it doesn't smell of urine and so on. You come to the university, you go to the washroom, and it's a different story altogether. Even though even the employees here probably are even paid more than what is paid. So it's all a matter of culture, how you have decided that things should work. You see, so what works in some organization would not necessarily work in yours. So you can't just go and see what is happening here and say that, okay, let me also come and do it here. No, you have to contact what are the human beings, in fact, their competence level, their caliber, their thinking, their mindset, the culture, and all those things. Those things are the things you have to take into consideration when you are implementing any change. But we look at these models just to give us a broad perspective of what is out there. So the end of the day is to, introduce yourself in the discussion forum. So like I said, I think I can end the recording here so that we don't